was that their world was incredibly inconsistent. They started by giving us two vague criteria for what counts as sentience, and then tried to apply those vague criteria to the subset of all sentient animals, that is the dolphin and the primate. So in the first place, they couldn't give us some concrete reason why, like, my ability to identify myself in the mirror is important, or why my ability to have friends is important. In fact, we only really heard that analysis fairly late in their third speaker, but even then, it was undermined by the weight of the contradictions we heard in their second speaker, when she told us that anything which has the ability to make you feel like compassion, anything with the ability to move you, should count as something which we should care about. Because you see, even if they claim that this was an even-if argument, that's what that case adds up to, doesn't it? Like their arguments about constructing a humane society suggest that anything which provokes any element of humanity in us should be protected. Their argument that we should accord anything with some vaguely human characteristic alludes to the idea that anything which is vaguely human deserves protection. So in fact, their side's attempt to limit the scope of their case and their policy to only primates and dolphins at the start broke down by the end of the debate, where they were essentially arguing that anything, any animal whatsoever, deserves rights. You see, if they don't accept that any other animal deserves the same protection as humans, then they have committed the very same sin they accused us of, being whimsical and being arbitrary. Because there is no good reason why, like, only animals with the ability to identify themselves in the mirror deserve protections, whereas other animals don't. So their world was either insane because it gave the same rights to every animal in the animal kingdom, or it was contradictory. Let's look at the two types of harms which accrue in this debate: harm to people and harm to animals themselves. First, harm to people. Now, their third speaker tried to downplay the amount of harm which occurs against people. But we've brought you some compelling arguments down the line from our first to our third about the sorts of harms which accrue. First, there's a tremendous financial and resource burden. And this is not something to be taken lightly, by the way. Think about what their policy says: basic welfare for animals, providing shelter, providing legal and police protections to animals. These costs add up in a world where our resources are already drained, where the majority of people live below the poverty line, where welfare systems across the world are overtaxed. This is about the humongous opportunity cost posed to people, especially if the policy is going to randomly expand in the future to include all sorts of animals. But there is a far more direct harm to the opportunity cost. It's a direct harm to the person who doesn't live in the urban cities they talked about, but who lives in the rural jungles, or who lives near rural jungles and in rural villages as well. People whose land can be trampled upon willy-nilly by elephants. By the way, not baboons that they tried to mischaracterize as arguing. People who can't consume animals for meat any longer. Like, aside from the fact that there are actually poor people in the world there who are forced to eat even the low-nutrition baboons they talked about. Their policy also opens the floodgates to banning all sorts of other harms to animals. What happens on the day we decide that chickens look cute and therefore shouldn't be like and therefore are deserving of human protections as well? These are the sorts of harms which occur, especially if their policy expands its ambit without limits. But finally, aside from the concrete harms which accrue to human beings, we talked about the backlash which these harms cause to animals themselves. And here's where we really took this debate, on the question of which side protects animals better. First, they told us we need a compassionate society. And we told you the way to construct a compassionate society is not to force every person to give up his tax dollars, those precious dollars meant to pay for his son's education and for his son's food, to the protection of some baboon in the wild, whom the species of which he's never heard of before. We told you their side engenders backlash against animals, it cripples the movement to protect animals by diminishing political support, and finally, it's a massive problem-solution mismatch. Because if the problem is one or two animal experiments going wrong, then ban those animal experiments. There are far more specific policy mechanisms and instruments you can use, as contrasted to the blunt instrument which team opposition wanted to protect. At the end of the day, which side really stood for compassion? The side which pretended to defend and champion the rights of animals, but whose language was incredibly centered around the human being and the human construct? Or the side which understood that realistically, there are far better ways for us to balance the rights between animals and human beings as a whole? We leave the side